a lot of the kind of research that we do in this thinking tank, and many of you would do in academia, involves trying to understand what's going on in our society, often by looking at following the money, as it were, looking at how we spend our money, and using that as a way to understand what's going on in society. Interestingly, time use studies are a very different way of trying to understand what's going on in society, an entirely different approach to looking at how people spend their working lives, their home lives, and it's an incredibly rich but relatively poorly known and not very widely understood area. This evening we're incredibly lucky to have probably the world's leading expert on these kind of studies with us. Professor Gershny is Professor of Sociology at Oxford. He's also the Director of the Centre for Time Use Research. He runs a very large multinational study of different time use data sets. This is a very interesting time also to have Professor Gershny with us, because a lot of these issues have moved centre stage in politics as well. The Prime Minister has talked about his wanting an index of well-being, not just talking about GDP, but general well-being. And the Office for National Statistics is doing projects at the moment to try and measure this, which I think the Professor may touch on this evening. The Prime Minister has also talked about trying to create a big society. Politicians increasingly interested in issues which once would have not been considered political at all, but in fact personal, about, for example, work-life balance, or what kind of work men and women do in the home, or how much volunteering is going on in our society. So a lot of the kind of questions the politicians are now interested in are ones which really only this kind of evidence can give us a handle on. So it's a huge pleasure to be able to welcome Professor here this evening. I think he's going to run us through a presentation about some of the things that we can learn from time use studies, and then we'll have some questions and answers at the end.
Excellent.
So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's going to be a bit of a problem finding somewhere to perch.
We'll turn around for you.
Where people can see.
Okay. Technology.
There we go. Now, if I perch here, can you guys see? I think what I'm going to do is stand behind the table and rely. Right, okay. So, what I'm going to be talking about is a selection of results from a report that I've been putting together for the Office of National Statistics, indeed, directly for this prime ministerial initiative for studying well-being, and its change over time. And I could have had about 12 of these lessons. I've just chosen the 3 that I think are most central, and I say a little bit as I go about some others of them. And I'm going to try and convince you about three different things. First of all, I think everyone now suddenly recognizes that economic activity goes on outside the economy. We don't always realize how important it is or why it's important, but nevertheless, I think we're now recognizing that. I'm going to talk a bit about that. The second thing I'm going to talk about is that public policy can actually have an effect on the balance between work inside the economy and work outside the economy. And I'll be showing some of that effect in a moment. And the third thing relates more directly to the happiness or utility agenda. I'm going to show that in fact it can be that societies get less happy over a period when there's economic growth. And I'll show some of the mechanisms that are involved in that. And I'm going to be able to show them rather empirically, I'm happy to say. What's this all about? This is actually all about a particular approach to doing research on how you spend your time. You can run questionnaires. I'm sorry. You're right in front of me. How much time did you spend working last week?
Actually working probably about 80 hours or something like that.
But it could be 60, it could be 90, you
Not
don't
when you're
really know. And you don't really know I mean, the answer is nobody knows the answers to these questions. And yet, if you look at labour force survey, you'll find that a question hardly less crude than that is used as the basis for a really very central statistic in the whole of for the whole of the economic system. And of course, you don't have statistics about how much washing up you did or how much childcare you did, or that's just not around. Okay, so I'm not using questionnaire methods except in one particular way that I'll maybe have a chance to talk about in a bit. The alternative is using large-scale diary samples. Now, what I mean by a diary sample is getting people to fill in a diary like this. I don't know if it's quite, can you quite see what's going on? What we've got is times going down here. We've got 7 o'clock to 7:10, 7:10 to 7:20, and so on. And then we've got, what were you doing? Were you doing anything else at the same time? Where were you? Who were you with? Right? People, and what we do is we get large, randomly selected samples of people to fill in a diary of that sort. Well, for a day, sometimes you try and get them to fill it in for longer than a day, but we'll just be talking about day diaries of that sort. Okay, so this is a part of a day. Silly example, don't take it, but this is what you should have in mind as being the raw data. It's random samples of people filling in diaries for days that have been randomly sampled across the year. So you get a representative sample, not of the population, but of the population year, or the population year is what you're doing. And actually, it turns out that for various reasons, a lot of people have been doing this for a long time. This is the study that this is one of the studies that I'm running in Oxford. It's the multinational time use study. You don't need to read the numbers, you just need to note that there is a lot of very large numbers here. We've got about 20 countries going down the side there. We've got more countries than that. I've just pulled out ones that are useful. The dates at the top, the first is 1961 to 69, 70 to 74, 75 to 84, 85 to 89, 90 to 94, 95 to 99, 2000 onwards. All these, and the numbers in the middle are the number of randomly sampled diary days that we've got. We've got something rather more than 500,000 days from 20 countries over 40 years, and it's that data that I'm going to be talking about in the next half hour. One bit of academic preliminary. I'm going to be talking about work in a very general sense, paid work, but also unpaid work. What's unpaid work? Well, the economists have a criterion, it's called the third person criterion, that looks a pretty tough, hard definition. I'm not sure it is, well, we'll come back to it, how it works as well. They say that work is any activity you can pay a third party to do for you without losing the benefit from it. Yep. So, washing a floor is work, whether you're being paid for it or whether I'm doing it as part of my household duties. Changing nappies is work. Going to a concert, well, I couldn't pay someone to do that for me without losing the benefit from it, so that's not work. It sounds as if it works very well indeed, except that when you actually work through the whole of the day, it doesn't work so well at all. I mean, let me give you is going to a cricket match work?
Could be networking.
Could be networking. Well, actually, my wife is a cricket fan, and I hate cricket. So I could pay someone to go to a cricket match. Okay, so, and in fact, when you go through and I'll be talking a bit about asking people how much they enjoy activities. And you find that people don't enjoy some activities very much. And in fact, okay, we'll see in a minute that it's the general pattern you'd expect, you know, washing clothes at the bottom and going to the theatre at the top. But there's a huge variation among what people, you know, I actually like scrubbing floors, I have to say. But anyway, what you get when you use this third person criterion, you don't ask everyone what you could do. What you do is you use that criterion in the way national statistics offices do to produce a list of activities that fit. And then you call all of those activities, you know, so any clothes washing, any childcare, all of that, shopping, travelling to the shops and so on, all of that is going to be counted as work because it's judged by some committee to fall in the third person criterion, fall under the third person criterion definition of, whereas going to cricket, despite my prejudices, I'm going to continue to be unable to persuade this this committee of wise people that is in fact work. So you get a result from that. You've got so much unpaid work. The key thing that we have to talk about, and I'll be saying more about this over time, is that at different points in time, very similar activities, either actually the same activity or similar activities with similar purposes, may be either paid work or unpaid work. And various things that happen, technological changes and public policy changes, shift activities, you know, from unpaid work to paid work, or from paid work to unpaid work, sometimes substituting one paid for unpaid, sometimes substituting unpaid for paid. If you just look at gross national product, if you just look at a national product indicator, you miss these movements into and out of the economy, and hence you miss some of the economists call them externalities, that are generated by particular sorts of technical change. Here's my favourite one, we'll see more of it in a minute. You move from the corner shop, you stroll down to the corner shop, you put your head in, hello Mrs. Jones, the normal yes, goodbye Mr. Grocer. Boy on a bicycle then turns up 3/4 of an hour later at home with a box full of groceries. That's shopping. Wind on a couple of decades and, you know, drive 17 minutes, spend 18 minutes trying to park, spend 19 minutes walking to, because at 20 minutes walking round and then another 21 minutes. I'm exaggerating now, but you see what I mean. Now, okay, something has happened to GNP as a result of that change from the corner shop to the hypermarket. Something interesting has happened there. Actually, productivity has risen enormously and so on. But what you miss are the externalities, which is all that. On we go. So the answer is that what you have to do is look at something called extended national product. And I'll be talking about that in a moment. But before I do that, the next bit of more academic stuff for a moment is, this is a time budget. Now, some people talk loosely about diary studies as if they are time budgets. Diary studies are not time budgets. Diaries are diaries. They give you a sequence of activities, and as you saw, the sorts of diaries we keep give you very complex and interesting information about those activities. You can analyze them as sequences, as processes. One of the things you can do with those diaries is add up the minutes that you spend in various activities and divide by the number you first thought of to arrive at a time budget. Okay, this is a UK time budget from 1961. Now, the really important thing about time budgets is that they are absolutely fixed. You've got 24 hours, here's the key number, 1,440 minutes per day, and that does not change. All that happens is that social change, demographic change, technological change, regulatory change shifts those 1,440 minutes around in a particular way. And I've tried to organize these numbers in a way, and I'll come around try and explain it. Organize these numbers in a way that allows you to see what changes are going on. Now, in the rows, you've got different sorts of, let's think of them as wants. not needs, but wants. These are things that people want to get done. They want some sleep, they want shelter and nutrition, they want leisure, they want some home leisure and out-of-home leisure, some medical educational services, background services. Well, you actually want there to be police around. You don't actually spend, you hope, at least none of my respondents at all, spend any time consuming police services. It's well below the visibility here. But you have various people providing police services, so there's going to be some work in the society, some paid work in the society doing that, or conceivably unpaid work in the society, though it's not registered here. You'd have some work in the society that's providing for those background services, and also you have people who are working in the society not to provide for needs in that society, but to provide for wants in that society. They're working to provide for the wants of people in other societies. And that's why, just beyond this 1440 column that is the total amount of time devoted to each of these wants, you've got imported work time. That's time that other societies are spending in various ways meeting the wants and I won't try and explain to you how I calculate the little numbers here, but it involves input-output tables and a lot of not particularly abstruse but quite technical economics. The thing to notice are the big numbers here, which are the things that come out of the time use survey. First of all, you've got leisure time, you've got unpaid work time, and you've got paid work time, the paid work time being contributed by people in various different occupations. Okay? Now you get hold of this, the collection of diaries, you count up the total amount of time that you've got to spend in each of the activities that correspond to each of these cells, and they do indeed add up to 1,440 minutes, because as you divide by the number of people in the society, you can multiply that by 62 million or whatever it is to get the real number of minutes. So let's think of that as the great day of the society. Yep, that's how it all stacks up. And what you had in 1961 is 963 minutes of leisure in the very broadest sense, including sleep. You had just under 200 minutes of unpaid work, and you had, it's probably about 220 if someone's good at arithmetic, if you add up the minutes of work in all of those times, yeah, something like that. And then if you sum across there, if you sum along the rows, you get how many minutes of work and consumption time go to satisfy different sorts of wants. And here we can see, we can actually see the trade. It looks as if there's a time trade surplus here. We're exporting 45 minutes of work and only importing 40. That was in 1961, when we still had a manufacturing economy. Now, here's a bit of magic. 61, 2000. I'm just going to flash between them for a moment. What's going on? Well, let's look at the unpaid work column for a moment. Look at the out-of-home leisure shopping. I'm going to go from 61 to 2001. There are your minutes walking around the aisles of the, and so on. Okay, look at the bottom, was 196 minutes, it's now 224 minutes. Yep, some things don't change. Top right-hand corner, sleep total 558 in 2001. If you go backwards in time, it increases to a massive 564 minutes. I mean, that's going to be in the estimation error band. Okay. this is where I wanted to get us to. This is the change that we've seen between 61 and 2001. We've had paid work time going down, and it goes down by sort of an hour and a quarter over this period. Really substantial. That's been, you know, the big trend that everyone's aware of in time use that started off, you know, in the middle of the Victorian era and went pretty much continuously, you might think. Unpaid work time goes up from 186 minutes to 2. So, in other words, about half of the reduction in paid work time is compensated for by an increase in unpaid work time. In fact, if you look at 3 surveys, you see something slightly even more interesting stroke puzzling. It goes down by about 100 minutes paid work time between 60 and the mid-80s, and then it goes up by a quarter of an hour between the mid-80s and 2000. I think we knew this, but now put it against the unpaid work time, which of course we didn't know, and here you see it going up in the first period and not increasing so much in the second part of the period. But basically you've got a switch from a situation where a great majority, substantial majority of the work in the society was done for money, to a situation where less than half the work in the society is being done for money, and more than half of the work in the society is being done for something else, for free. How do you value this? Because obviously what this comes down to is that you want to extend gross national product. So you've got some idea of what's going on. There are 2 different ways of doing it. The first of them is called the shadow wage approach. Economists love this because it's a rational choice approach. Obviously, if you're a brain surgeon and you choose not to work an extra half hour in the operating theatre, but instead work an extra half hour in your kitchen, then obviously the value of your cake is an appropriate fraction of your 150,000, whatever it is you're earning. Whereas if you're a pastry chef and you choose not to work in your shop, but you do it at home, of course, well, you're going to earn about a 15th or a 20th of the value calculated in this way. It's going to be about a 15th of the answer is this is daft. This is daft. This is daft. So actually, anyone serious who goes about this, as opposed to a professional economist, this is what the Office of National Statistics does, is they look at the shadow prices, and they either look at all the different tasks that you do and find specialist wages. Say if you're driving children to school, you use a minicab driver's wage. If you're cooking breakfast, you look at a short order cook's wage, a nursery nurse, so on and so forth. Or much more sensibly, you use a housekeeper wage. You say this is what someone who's paid to do all of these tasks on behalf of the household gets paid. You find that from the Office of National Statistics, and hey presto, you can value the unpaid bit of the work as well as the paid bit of the work, and do that, and we get this picture. We've got over this period a just under 3-fold growth in national product, if you use a conventional national product calculation. If you look at extended national product, you find a substantially faster growth that reflects this shift of activities between the two economies. And you find that the ratio of extended to actual rose substantially between 61 and 84, and has fallen a bit since then, but that's to do with the values that we're using to value unpaid work, combined with these 2 irregular shifts, where in the first part of the period people shifted out of paid work but increased their unpaid work, and the second part of this period, at least in aggregate terms, paid work went up but unpaid work didn't increase. So anyway, that's the first picture. Very substantial part of production taking place outside the economy, how you relate this, and I promised myself I wasn't going to mention the words, but how you relate these changes to the big society changes that we're hearing about all the time. Well, maybe we'll get to talk about that in a bit. But anyway, here's the evidence for how much at time people spend working for other people without being paid for it, how it relates by time and value to the official statistics. Okay, here's another example. Here's my second example. I just showed you change now. I'm going to look in different countries now at historical changes, and I'm going to see if we can make any inferences about the effects of public regulation. And we're going to use this multinational time use study that I mentioned before, and we're going to start off with a spaghetti diagram. On the left, you've got men's unpaid work, and you've got minutes per day, and it goes from sort of 60 to 180. And you can see pretty much in general it's going up. That is to say, you move from the bottom left to the top right. But otherwise, you've got lots of different countries behaving in lots of different ways, and you can't make any sense of that. And similarly for women, do notice, I should stress that the scales are not quite the same. I don't know if you can see them. Instead of going from 60 to 180, it goes from 200 to 450. But anyway, the women's are definitely coming down. Okay, as I said, it's a spaghetti diagram, but we can do something about it. And this requires two more academic steps. Academic step number one is to divide the left diagram by the right diagram, or rather divide the left diagram by the total of the left and the right diagram. You have an index of domestic labour, which is simply women's unpaid work, and I calculate the means per country. You can do more sophisticated things, but this is good enough. The women's unpaid labour, divide that by the total of men's and women's unpaid labour, and you've got a domestic division of labour index. What do we get? Before we get to look at it, we also need, and here's some sociology, these are different sorts of countries. And it goes back to, if anyone is a fan of Gösta Esping Andersen, this will be familiar to them. The different sorts of countries. You've got countries like the UK and the US, and actually they're all Anglophone, that believe in the liberal market. The sociology, the jargon is a modified breadwinner gender ideology. Women have both caring roles and paid work roles. That's the liberal market regime. Social democratic Nordic regimes, dual earner family model. Everyone does everything. The corporatist European, a weak familist gender ideology. Men are primarily the breadwinners, but women are allowed to do it if they must. And women are carers, but that's the way it's organised. And finally, a southern regime that's much more traditional. Okay, so you're going to look at these different regimes, the Doddle indexes in these different regimes, and how they change over time. Right, there's our first. That's the Nordic regime, and this time it is going to be the same y-axis. It goes from 55% to 85%, and you must admit there's been some serious change there. We've got Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and the model means I've run a regression. I've done some statistical magic just to find out how it works, and you get that downward, very abrupt downward. It's very abrupt because I've squashed it up because I'm going to compare it with the other countries, but it's a very substantial shift over a 40-year period. It's got those same intervals from the 60, here it goes from 61 to 69 on the right-hand side, and 2000 on the, on the left-hand side, and 2000 on the right-hand side. And you see, in these countries, it comes down from something around 80% of all the unpaid work being done by women to something like 58, 60% of all the unpaid work being done by women. Okay, that's the Nordic. Next, we've got the Anglophone. Now, note that they start off in pretty much the same in the same area pretty much as the Nordics did in the 60s, but they don't come down nearly so far. Instead of going down from 80 to 58, they go down from sort of 80 to about 62, 63. Okay, they're coming down, but there's still some difference. And when you do the statistics, that's the point of the modelling of the model, you find there's a significant difference between those trends. Then you've got the corporatist, slower still, declining. These are the same, again, they're starting from the same place, but because they've developed different views of the way. Sorry, I should have said people should interrupt me if they see something interesting.
Where are men and women happiest?
That's the third one. We're coming to that in just a minute, and I'm delighted with the results. But let's carry on. So there's the corporatist, and then we've got the southern. Look at that. And those are two surveys. All we've got there actually in this one is an Italian trend plus a Spanish point. But later on, I've got a bit more data, and we've got a Spanish trend as well. Okay, so what do we get from that set of four pictures? The countries are changing; they're all changing, but they're changing in different rates, and they do seem to be changing in a way that's consistent with this sociologist's model of different attitudes to gender roles in different groups of countries. Okay? Public regulation does seem to matter, and okay, I've said it's a public policy effect. Well, it's only, one can only say it's a public policy effect in the sense that all of these countries, apart from the southern, started off in pretty much the same place in the 1960s, and they've come in different directions because their public policy has embodied different assumptions about how men and women operate. Why does it matter? Oh, there's something else that I just let me drop in. While we've got these clear gender differences in how much paid work and how much unpaid work people do, there is an extraordinary phenomenon that economists refer to as ISO work. If you add the paid and the unpaid work together, you find that men and women do the same amount of work. Okay. It's remarkable. It seems to work almost everywhere you look, and right the way through this data set. Okay, now why should we care? Now, given that notion of ISO work, that the total amount of work that men and women do is the same, and let's assume for a moment that that phenomenon moves from the macro to the micro, that happens pretty much in households, and it does in fact. So you could say that you might well say, well, men and women do the same amount of work if they choose to specialise, some in paid and some in unpaid work. Why should we be concerned about this? Why is it an issue? And it's entirely straightforward, and it comes down to this issue of rates of accumulation of human capital. Now, what I mean by human capital is people's demonstrated abilities to hold down a job of a particular value. There's nothing ideal about this. You simply observe what jobs people with certain sorts of work histories have, and you calculate the human capital from that. You can infer the human capital by complex econometric techniques. You can in fact infer the human capital of non-employed women and non-employed men, as well as employed women and employed men, by looking at the combination of the work histories, the training, and the actual wages of the people who are in employment. And you do this by that process of modelling who goes into employment and then what the wages of those who are in employment. What happens is the paid work you do determines the wage rate of the next job you get. And if you specialise, when you go into a marriage, the partner who specialises in unpaid work suffers a human capital penalty relative to the partner who stays in work. It's effectively a transfer of earnings capacity from one to the other, and we know which from which to whom. We get a transfer of earnings capacity from the woman to the man. Well, it doesn't matter actually. It may well be that that's rational, but only if the couple's going to stay together, because then they'll all get the fruits of this. But the deal we're in now is that something like 50% of all, it may be gone down a bit, maybe only 45% of partnerships that actually subsequently split. Now, here's another talk, but I sometimes give this talk about the prince who marries a princess and turns her into a scullery maid, that well-known fairy tale. You both got good jobs, you have the baby, it's a good idea that he goes out to work and you stay at home because that's the way it works. And then it's fine because he gets his promotion. If you're going back into work, you've actually fallen back on the run, you get a worse job than you had. So you don't go back to work, and that's fine, because in fact the household income is probably as high as it would be if you were both working and both having to look after the child, and so he would have less. That's fine, except that he runs off with his secretary and leaves you with the baby, taking his human capital with him and leaving you with, well, depending on the public policy regime, what support, what property transfer, what support for single mothers to enter employment, and so on. All of those issues generate, differential male and female poverty. If you look at an old colleague of mine from Essex called Stephen Jenkins, who looks at the consequences of divorce, there's a really clear pattern, stronger in the UK than in many other countries, of where marriage marginally benefits women, divorce vastly benefits men, and seriously costs women. And it's because of this process of differential rates of human. Okay. That was the second. That's the second. The third story is about happiness. It's a very, very Are you happy? Sorry.
Am I happy? Do you mean during the day or in my life?
Exactly. Well, radio. I asked one of my Swedish friends, "Are you happy?" And he says, "What, do you take me for a fool?" And yet you've got these standard batteries of questions that ask this, and millions of survey dollars go year by year on this sort of activity. And also we know very well that this is old research now from an American economist called Easterlin, who demonstrated this thing that economists call the Easterlin paradox, which is that you can find some association between GNP growth and happiness up to a certain point, and then it sort of levels off and you get richer and richer, and the answers to the questions, how happy are you, don't show any improvement. Well, obviously, when you think about it, you can't possibly get more and more ecstatic. But the question's not a very good one. You don't know what it refers to. You don't know. The much better economists approach this man, Kahneman, who actually won a Nobel Prize about 7 or 8 years ago. He talks about this concept of objective happiness. And objective it's almost it's a tease, really, because obviously happiness is subjective, but this is the closest to a reliable measure of happiness that you can get to. And he says it's the instantaneous enjoyment of your current activity. And I'm not going to take a poll of how many people enjoy it at this time. Don't tell me, please. But so what you would do is John McInnes just asked me what about beeper studies. The best way of doing this is that you carry around a beeper in your pocket. This is a mad Pole called Csikszentmihalyi, who owned a very large radio mast in Chicago and hooked it up to a random number generator. At random points in the day or night, the beeper went off. And all over Chicago, people would feel into their pockets and pull out and write down the instantaneous affect. It's a rather grotesque picture. I've got a rather more civilized way of doing this, which in fact is one that Kahneman suggested. He said it was his invention in 2004. We'll see about that in a moment. What you can do is, remember the diary that I showed you, which has various columns? Well, you just have a diary of that sort, and you have an extra column where you say how much you're enjoying this on a scale of 0 to 10. Yeah? Well, it just so happens that both in the UK and the US, back in the 1980s, we collected large diary samples, large national samples of diaries that did exactly that. Here are the results. Now, this is just the US data, just to illustrate. And I put the activities that go from out-of-home leisure, sleep, other home leisure, television, childcare, the mean of all the activities, then paid work, travel, shopping, unpaid work. I put these in the order that they occur in the American data. Okay, so it wasn't that I chose this ordering. If you look at the means, and what we've got here are the means and the 95% confidence intervals. And what you can see is that, without doubt, people like out-of-home leisure absolutely, clearly, much more than they like most other activities. The widest confidence interval that we see there is for childcare. That's, of course, because we've got the fewest people doing childcare, because not that many people have the small children who do it, so you've got a big confidence interval there, but you find it's around the mean for all the activities. It's enjoyed slightly more than paid work, travel, and that travel doesn't mean recreational travel, it means travel for some purpose, travel to something, as opposed to trips for enjoyment. Travel is not enjoyed, is enjoyed less than paid work. Shopping is enjoyed less than travel, and unpaid work of all the other sorts of unpaid work are enjoyed a lot less than that.
Well, surely,
okay. Yep.
if you did any of those activities all the time, you'd become miserable.
You would indeed, and there's another lecture where I'm afraid I haven't got my computer here, but I'd love to show it to you. You can actually work out, and this is the first time it's, as far as I know, it's ever been done, you can work out, you can demonstrate diminishing marginal utility. And in fact, what you see using exactly this data, and in fact what you see is that marginal utility goes to 0, you get the nice U-shaped curve that you're supposed to, that all textbooks invent their examples of. You can show, for example, that sleep goes to 0 at 620 minutes. And,
you can have too much sleep.
Which you can have too much sleep, which, you know, all the epidemiological evidence tells you exactly that. You find that home leisure in the US goes to 0 at 430 minutes. 430 minutes a day. That's an awful lot of out-of-home leisure. And then I calculated the British version, it came to 435. The extraordinary thing is that when you do this empirical work, you actually look at how much people enjoy their time. What you find is, well, all I've got so far is this UK-US comparison, but they're very, very similar. And that's what this now illegible, but you don't need to read it, because what we've got here is the same order of activities going from out-of-home leisure to unpaid work, with the mean in the middle. But then I've got 4 times as many points here, because I've got men and women for each of those, and then the left-hand side is the US, and the right-hand side is the UK. And look, you see it's just the same patterns in the two, very, very similar patterns. And indeed, the fact that the UK is a bit lower than the US is just because the research used a different scale. And I haven't transformed it so that the means are identical. If you do transform it so that the means are identical, you can't actually tell which country is which. There is one difference. British men appear to enjoy unpaid work, that's this one, more than American men do. But that's the only really substantial difference. It really looks like there is, in similar sorts of societies where these activities mean similar sorts of things, it really looks as if there's a very similar pattern of enjoyment. Now, from this sort of evidence, we can move from big pictures that look like that one, that show you how much you enjoy individual activities, to much smaller numbers that weight the enjoyment by the amount of time you spend in it. And indeed, it does have this effect of diminishing marginal utility, so that people who spend a lot of time in the activity are judged not to enjoy that time so much. And we calculate gross national utility in a parallel way to the way here you've got gross national product, which values all output from paid work, extended national product, which values all output from paid and unpaid work. But remember that third person criterion. Work is the thing that you do entirely as an instrumental activity. You do it in order to achieve satisfaction elsewhere. In other words, your work time is excluded, the quality of your work time is excluded from the national, is simply not considered as part of the national product. Obviously, that's the way the definitions work. So obviously, you can have a situation where a society gets a lot richer. It makes its people a lot more miserable by making them work in nasty sorts of jobs. That's something I forgot to mention. There's a big range of enjoyment of jobs, which goes in the expected way from the worst jobs to the best jobs. It's not true that people who earn lots of money say they don't enjoy their jobs in the way that some people have suggested. In fact, people who earn lots of money also enjoy their jobs a lot. Now, obviously, if you have gross national product increasing as a result of a growth in the number of good jobs, it might actually improve national enjoyment as well. But first of all, we have to calculate national enjoyment. What we do is this. We simply take the amount of time that you spend in each activity, multiply it by your mean level of enjoyment of that activity, sum those and divide them by the number you first thought of, and you arrive at gross national utility, which values how much you enjoy your consumption and how much you enjoy your production. Okay, that's straightforward. What I'm going to show you now is not so straightforward, and I apologize. It's a little counterfactual experiment using all this international data that we've got. And I'm not going to show you the regression models that I use, but what you can do is take the UK and the US, very similar relationships between how you spend your time and the sort of person you are and how much you enjoy each of those different activities. You estimate that for the UK and the US jointly, and then you use that equation to impute enjoyment value, mean enjoyment levels for each activity, for each of those tens of thousands of days spent in those days data collected in the multinational time use study. Okay, so there you've got the basis for predicting how much, for estimating how much people must have been, would have been enjoying their lives if enjoyment in those countries at those times corresponded to the enjoyment levels of the UK and the US, the enjoyment structures of the UK and the US in the mid-1980s. Okay, so imputation, and then we just adjust these numbers just so we can understand them easily. We adjust the gross national utility numbers that come out of that so that for each sex across this huge data set, the mean for women is 0 and the standard deviation of the gross national utility is 1, and similarly for men. So it's standardized gross national utility measures for these imputed numbers. And now look at those. Here we've got Nordic countries, and we've got going from the 1970s. I didn't have enough information about the earlier studies to do this for the earlier studies, but we go from the mid-70s to the 2000s, and we plot these different groups of countries separately for men and women. We've got right in the middle there this mean for the sex, the 0 line. We see that basically the Nordic men's gross national utility has been declining a bit, but it's still just above the 0, the mean. And Nordic women have actually, and what this is telling us is that the pattern of life for Nordic women is such as to make them happier over time, and substantially above that median for the group, for all the women that we've got. Okay, that's the Nordic countries. Next we've got the corporatist countries. Again we've got, converging to that 0 mean. Here we've got corporatist women getting to look less happy. There's only actually 2 countries where we've got change data, which are Netherlands and France, and we've got the French women looking a bit happier over time, and the Dutch women looking less happy over time, but still they end up above, even at the end of this period, they end up above that 0 mean level of happiness. Then we've got the Anglophone. Everyone's enjoying their life less, apart from the Americans, who had a catastrophic fall in the 70s and have been recovering a bit, but they all end up well below that 0 line. Yeah, they're well below that mean line. Both men and women, everyone getting more miserable. And then for the southern group, we've got no change. No, that's not change. Notice we've only got 1 time point for Spain and for Spain and Italy here, but look how similar they are. Here the differences between men and women, men on the left, women on the right. The men are well above and the women are well below that median line. Remember what the domestic...
Why the birth rate is so low, because the women just don't want to do it.
Absolutely. Well, there are all sorts of... Too much grief.
For 70 years.
Too much hassle, too much grief, particularly as they expect to get a job. Okay, so we've got the Nordic, well above the mean, the women rising substantially, corporatist, both sexes converging on the mean, Anglophone, sexes falling below the mean, and southern, men above it and women below it, very, very substantially. Okay, seems to be reasonably straightforward actually, and it's to do with those patterns of work that I started by showing. You've got growth in total work time in the Anglo country, it's the market, growth in total work time in those Anglo countries, and also growth in the amount of domestic work that both men and women are doing, which, remember, the domestic work ends up right at the non-enjoyed end of things. Women in southern countries left with a disproportionate share of the unpaid work. No wonder they're miserable. They're miserable about it, and they're being expected to do paid work do some paid work as well. Okay. Lesson for public policy, economic growth. If you're not doing the right things at the same time to look after people, economic growth can reduce objective happiness. And what are the right sorts of things? Shorter working hours, more paid employment, and childcare support, fair sharing between men and women. And those things can both encourage growth and increase happiness. Lots of other things I could have shown you about the work day and the work week, because of course you see when people are working, because we've got for most of these surveys the whole household time budget, you can see whether husbands and wives are working together or at different times, and when during the week they're working. We can see the distribution of leisure between different groups of people. We can look at the evolution of groups into work-rich, time-poor, and vice versa. We can see about healthy life practices, eating in the right way, sleeping in the right time, taking the right sorts of exercise. And here's just one example to who do you reckon out of all the occupational groups takes the least exercise?
Doctors.
Doctors! There we are. It is quite a grotesque result if you look at that. What we've got here are deciles for the whole population of, they've got the bottom decile, the 10% who take the least, and the top decile, the 10% who take the most. And we've allocated the whole population into these deciles, and then we've looked at these column percentages which show you how different people in different occupations are located in those deciles. And there you see the doctors and the teachers, I may say, vastly overrepresented at the bottom decile and vastly underrepresented at the top. In fact, if we carry on with this, we'll actually find that it's doctors in particular, but also people in the education business who have much less leisure time in total. And anyway, we're certainly not going to pursue that, because that's yet another lesson, not one I'm going to produce. Here's the sting in the tail. You may have noticed that I've been using some rather old data. For the last 5 years, I've been nagging various people and writing research proposals, and I cannot raise the $1.5 million or $2 million that it will take to get a good time use survey for this country. Most other EU countries have done another big time use survey around 2010, 2011. That's what it's all about.
Thank you so much, that's brilliant. We do have a bit of time for some questions and answers, I think, if you're happy to do that. I'm sure there will be some if you say who you are and where you're from. If you're not,
Unpaid, source Maury. The studies on time use also show interesting things like when you enjoy spending more time with your friends rather than your family, or indeed sex, don't they, some of them?
It depends how they're done.
Right.
If you ask questions, how do you enjoy spending it? The problem is you don't know what those mean.
Yeah.
And the critical point about this methodology is that you know exactly what these people are doing at the time, and also you know how much they've done before and how much time in total they've spent in that activity during the day, and so on. So you know what's going on, whereas those questions, which I keep coming across and being irritated by, I don't know what they mean. And because I don't know what they mean, I don't believe them.
And the difference between happiness during the day and when you ask people about their lives as a whole?
Well, I think that potentially this is something that we can sort out. But what you need to do is to collect the right instantaneous happiness questions, collect the right information about life circumstances, and then ask the right happiness questions. And actually, and I can tell you what the right happiness questions are. There's a set of questions, or at least a line of questioning that's referred to as domain satisfaction. And you ask people, so you don't just one, you say, how happy are you with your job? How happy, and then within the job you say with your promotion prospects and with the tasks you do, and then you say, how happy are you with your family, and then a couple of more specific
Is this what ONS are going to do? Will they be asking the right questions?
No.
Well, there is a process going on.
Yeah.
The reason that they've got me to write this report is that I'm suggesting a set of questions. Don't know, John, have you been involved in this?
Well, I was just at an ONS consultation meeting at Manchester.
The happiness one.
And the consultation doesn't close for another couple of weeks, but they already announced the 4 questions they were going to use. They weren't domain specific; they were all subjective.
Yeah.
So it wasn't very encouraging.
Well, I think it's early days.
You'll still get big subgroup differences that will say
It'll tell you something.
Yeah.
The problem is you don't know what it tells you.
Sure.
But if you ask the right questions about life circumstances properly and about how much they enjoy the thing, what they're doing with their lives, and how much they enjoy the things they're doing, so you've got immediate things, immediate measures for the things you can measure immediately, and then you ask these general questions about satisfaction, and you then connect the satisfaction answers with the enjoyability of life by these other material circumstances questions. You can then maybe disentangle something useful. Asking 4 affect questions, though.
I'm Ruth Marshall from the Department for Communities and Open Government. Just an idle bit of speculation on the methods thing. I was quite interested by the difference between the diaries and the beeps. And I'm not involved in this kind of work, but I just wondered whether you're more likely to get an honest answer to a beep question because you don't have time to reflect on what you'd be expected to say. We all think we enjoy holidays more than work,
right.
But actually some of our holiday experiences can be quite stressful. If we actually got beeped in the middle of waiting for the check-in,
the beeper data, there's no question that the beeper data is the gold standard for those answers. The problem is you can't do very much with those answers. Because, for example, I mean, to go back to the point that, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, made before, one of the important things is the total duration in the activity. And that's the one thing you just can't get from a couple of random beats. You get a population distribution of enjoyment of activities. And it's most useful because you can then check the distributions of individual diary answers using the beepers, and that's where beepers are going to come in very useful. But you can't get durations, and also you can't get sequence. Because one of the other things that happens is, you enjoy a meal a lot more after you've worked than you enjoy it before you've worked. So, you need diaries to do that. We get round this to an extent by trying to encourage people to fill in their diaries continuously through the day. They don't, we know that. But we do know that the beeper studies do produce similar results to the diary studies, so not too unhappy.
Brian Morrison, the Conservative Cooperative Movement. I have a problem with the actual concept of happiness. Because it's an ephemeral state. I mean, it's a moving feast. I could be happy walking into this room because it's empty, and in another minute I'll be happy because I found someone to speak to. So how to, you can measure, you can create a sort of hypothetical measurement situation, but it's movable.
Yeah.
It's never.
You're absolutely right, and this is the point that Mr. Kahneman was making. The closest you can get is capturing that ephemeral value. The beep goes off, you say, yeah, I'm enjoying. Except you need some reflection, actually, to say, because I don't know whether I'm happy or not most of the time. But I can actually say I'm enjoying this, and I'm not. But it takes some reflection, and that's actually why the diary works as well. You're constructing it, and because no one's told you what you're expected to be doing, you're recording all the different activities. and you're not making up your participation in the activity, it's actually far more work to try to mislead some hypothetical and distant reviewer of your self-completion diary than it is actually to try and give the first answer that occurs to you. So, the diary is not perfect, but it's as good as you can get.
There was a question from a gentleman at the front who had just been waiting.
Yes, I'm going to find it difficult to say what I won't be too coherent, but I'll do my best. Seems to me that all your exposition of the work has an egocentric base to it. So the assumption that one of the functions of government is to promote enjoyment and happiness, and how people use their time be understood in order to further that objective. What worries me hugely about that approach is that it ignores the international and the intergenerational consequences of people that you are surveying how they're deriving their enjoyment, and for that reason I would, for instance, as you would guess, say let's have a proxy against which whether your enjoyment is being achieved at somebody else's expense or some other country's expense or something like that. Right. And I'll just give very quickly one example for those who don't understand what I'm more than hinting at, and it is that you may get considerable enjoyment from taking a plane and going across to see Niagara Falls or something like that. The consequence of that is that you are hugely damaging the future of life on Earth because of the accumulation of greenhouse gases. Right. I've said enough.
No, thank you. Because Mayor provides me with an opportunity to say one of the other lectures that I could have given here, and I've not been asked what the policy measures are, but what an ideal system of national accounts is. The point that I'm trying to get over in the ONS report is that this time budget is a way of unifying a variety of different sorts of national accounts. I've just talked about two of them, which is the national product account, which just looks at the work, the output from the work or the value of the consumption, and the gross national utility that looks at the enjoyment of all of these different minutes in the time budget. But there are quite other accounts that you can construct on exactly the same time budget. You can, for example, look at the carbon footprint of a minute spent in a particular sort of leisure and nutrition. Or, to put it a slightly different way, we've got these rows here, which are ways of satisfying wants that combine consumption time and unpaid work time and paid work time in different degrees. If the want you're satisfying is out-of-home leisure, and you're satisfying that want by going on a bicycling holiday, that has an entirely different carbon footprint than if you're going to than if you fly to Aruba for the week. If you fly to Aruba for the weekend, and you can use this time budget as a basis for a model that looks jointly at both national product, national utility, and carbon generation, because this is the hub. This is the thing that adds up to one, which is the life of the society, and you can see all the different activities that are involved here, and each of the activities that are involved here has its own carbon footprint and has its own pollution consequences and so on. So you can construct environmental accounts on this basis, as well as the conventional economics or the unconventional economics that I've been talking about. And there are people around the world who are using time budgets for exactly this purpose. The question that the Office of National Statistics asked me was, can you provide a framework for bringing together different sorts of national accounts? And that's what the time budget provides you with.
Can I just make a brief reaction to what you said? I think that almost everybody doesn't realise the gravity of the situation with regard to our burning of fossil fuels. And the way you've responded to me seems to me to give the impression that if we incorporate carbon footprint into one's understanding of the relationships between paid and unpaid work and happiness and enjoyment, we can reconcile those differences to a sufficient extent. Whereas I'll just make this last point, whereas I would argue very strongly indeed that we are obliged as a caring and moral generation to recognise that if we do anything which is above zero carbon, and it may sound extremist, but this is the reality, if we do anything that is above this, then we are contributing in a way which is going to ensure that the future is going to be worse.
Then let me be clearer. Let's distinguish between the accounting and the political judgment. The accounting is straightforward. What you're telling us is a particular political judgment. I'm not going to agree, well actually I agree with you, but I'm not going to agree with you or disagree with you, because that's not what I'm talking about at this point. And the answer that I gave was to do with the accounting framework, not to do with the political judgments you make on, I think John had it.
There was a question, the gentleman in the second row as well.
I just wondered whether the conclusions you come to about how happy we are, or what we should be, what policy implications there are, depend upon whether you use the time accounting method or the sort of ranking method that the national the ONS is about to sort of start using in its surveys. And secondly, really, what are the specific policy implications of this? I mean, you gave some examples of broad areas where it could be useful. Yeah. Are there any specific things you think you've learned from this that we should be doing differently now, or we should change?
I think I outlined my middle point is no. I think I come back to my three lessons. Two of which have specific implications. The first of them is to do with the division of domestic labour and fairness. That we should be doing things to encourage that, and there are lines of public policy that do that in terms of support for working women, and most important, encouragement for men not to work. So that's a line of policy that comes out very clearly. And then from the third of my points, there's this issue about the mix of work that you have in societies, and then the work-leisure balance, which is what underlies these changes in the tight budgets. And we can see that that the pursuit of gross national product may actually produce perverse consequences, and that we might actually be willing, we might actually want to advance as a policy alternative an attempt to hold economic growth back in order to achieve a happier society, as well as to hold economic growth back in order to reduce the society's carbon footprint.
Or ignore it because it's too closely involved in the production of the burning of fossil fuels.
Yes.
One question I was going to ask is about why people feel very busy now. So everyone I meet in my job, you say how people say, oh, it's incredibly busy. The number of paid hours has gone down, and the total amount of work doesn't.
There's two answers to that. Number one is that number one comes from very old economist indeed, Thorsten Veblen. Mm-hmm. Remember the theory of the leisure class? Hands up who's read it. It's a wonderful book. You should all read it. Class. Excuse me. Thorsten Veblen has this notion of leisure as the badge of honour. And the whole book is about the way the leisured classes influence the behaviour of the working classes in such a way that the working classes always want to represent themselves either in person or in proxy, by proxy as being leisured. That was the situation at the end of the 19th century. So where you actually had to work for a living, if you were a rich man but you had to work for it, so Veblen says you keep a retinue of family and servants and conspicuous idleness. That was his picture, because imitating the... Okay, if you were a millionaire in 1900, basically you'd inherited it from your dad, probably not your mum. And the way you got to be a millionaire was you simply clipped the coupons and played games. If you're a member of the superordinate class now and you earn $1 million a year, you earn $1 million not by not because you've inherited it from your dad, but because you're billing 2,000 hours at £500 an hour. To demonstrate that you're a member of the superordinate class now, you say, I'm busy, not I'm leisure. Busyness is the badge of honour. That's answer number one. The other thing that comes along with that is that when you look at these surveys, and in every single country for which I've got a cross-time trend, you find that reflecting that change in the badge of honour, reflecting that change is a change in the status gradient, in the status leisure gradient. It used to be the higher status you were, the more leisure you have. If you look now at modern societies, the higher status you are, the more work you have. You actually are busier, and you want to represent yourself as busier.
The remark I wanted to make is that I'm not for anything which I am for something which changes the perception that women who stay at home and take care of their children are not actually doing something valuable. And I think there's a huge perception which needs to be changed, so that women begin to feel that because you are looking after the producer, and men need to be looked after if they're doing work, children need to be taken care of. It's causing a lot of problems in society because the mothers are actually giving their mothering to somebody else who doesn't have a vested interest in those children.
Right.
So I'm not for any system whether that says it will make women happier not to take care of their own children.
Right. Look, I take that clearly, and it's entirely people's right to do that, and it oughtn't to be a priori a matter of public policy to encourage anything different. However, if you're going to do that, then you have to make sure that you have in place an appropriate divorce regime that makes sure that the human capital that's been transferred from the wife to the husband over the period of the marriage is compensated for in terms of the public, in terms of the support of the husband for the wife. Entirely straightforwardly, if you don't do that, and you encourage people, and you encourage women to stay at home, put those two things together, and you've got public policy which is generating gender inequality.
And unhappiness.
And unhappiness, exactly, and child poverty and lots of other nasties as well. Now, you can actually adopt that as a goal, and here's another line of public. If you can manage that divorce regime successfully, it would meet all these objectives. It's very, very difficult. I mean, all of that stuff with the child support agency, very, very, very difficult to manage.
Well, the Americans are very easy. I mean, I had an ex-husband who was living in Los Angeles and couldn't pay support, and they just threatened to jail him, and you have to pay.
He paid, you kept in touch with him. Yeah, that's right. No, that's a regime that is to an extent working. But how many people are in the States are in your fortunate position?
Assumes he has the money as well.
One, it assumes he has the money. It may well be that he says, I'm not going to work to be taxed 50%. He doesn't do it, and that drives everyone into poverty. So the wife, then, I'm not saying not you, of course, but the reverse Cinderella wife who's got no skills doesn't work, takes half the husband's return on his human capital. He says, I'm not going to work for this. That doesn't work, you see. So here's the problem. While I think that in principle you're right, and you don't say a priori it's a matter of encouraging women into work, in practice, if you want to run a modern society, and in particular if you want to leave reasonably progressive divorce laws in place, under those circumstances, the only way you can avoid gender unfairness practically actually is by providing encouragement for women into work. I mean, if you've got a better scheme, I'd be happy to see it, but it's those dimensions that I need to argue about.
What about the children? What happens to them?
The children are better off while the wife's working. I mean, the 90s evidence. Well, I mean, there are it works in different ways in different communities, and I'm not meaning to be insensitive to different cultural patterns, and obviously you have to have the possibility of women not being forced out to work, but giving people the opportunity to work and pointing out what the consequences are of particular life choices at particular times, and making sure that this is right at the heart of the gender ideologies that are promoted by the culture. Making sure that is in place. That's the issue.
Let's shift.
Oh yes, absolutely. Again, I entirely agree that a large part of this process would be met if men took the day off, if the father took the day off to go to the if the father took the day off to go to pick the sick child up from school rather than the mother did. You know, encouraging male responsibility in this area is just as
well, surely you can get them to take the day off to pick up the child and get them to pay.
This is very interesting. I'm just conscious that we're about to run out of time, and there's one last question from a lady who's been very patient at the back.
Hi, I've just got two very quick questions. One is around this economy of care and the work that's been done hugely around that by feminist scholars.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I missed it here, but we've talked a lot about childcare.
Yeah.
I was wondering if it is captured in any of the work that's done so far, or if it's projected for the future, about the economy of care that women take on in terms of social care and care of the elderly and the impact of that. And my second question was quite different around whether this study is actually broken down in terms of different demographics. We've talked about different community groups, different ages, different lifestyles, those kind of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I've given you. This is just a tiny tip of the iceberg. When you collect this data, people write down what they're doing. The data that I'm talking about is what comes from those studies. If you're caring for your mum, if the diary is properly written, then it will appear. By combining what you were doing and who you were with and where you were, you'll find that you'll be able to identify non-resident care of other adults as well as resident care of other adults. We've got, event by event, the whole of the diaries for each of those more than 500,000 individuals that I'm talking about. So yes, you can very easily produce those much more nuanced figures. And also you can look at the quality of care in a much more interesting way. For example, most of the numbers, I should have said this right at the beginning, most of the numbers I've been talking about are about using that what were you doing column. But we've also got what were you doing anything else at the same time. And a lot of child and elder care is done simultaneously with other. So we do actually use the whole diary to try and work that out. So yes, I mean, the more people working on it, the more results we'll get. The more results we'll get out of it. But it's going on all the time, and the data's here and available for you to work on.
I'm afraid with that we have ironically run out of time ourselves. We're now a small, because everyone's so busy these days, a small select band. But Professor Gushie, it was an incredibly interesting insight and first sort of taster of this whole field. Very, very interesting stuff. So thank you so much for coming. It's been intriguing. Thank you.